It's the final part of the Not Quite Halloween special. We've got 10 more movies left, and I think I saved the best for last. Let's go. The Manster is a 1959 American monster movie that was actually shot in Japan, which is a little intriguing for a movie from the 50s.
But sometimes it frightens me. Good.
A reporter named Stanford travels up the side of a mountain in Japan to meet with a doctor conducting experiments on mutations. We already know the doctor is up to no good because the cold open established that he created a monkey monster that murdered some people in a hot springs. After Stanford is unknowingly injected with some kooky concoction, he quickly starts exhibiting his worst traits. And over time, he begins to morph into something else. He's half man and half monster. You could say he's become a manster. I feel like the big problem with how this movie handles the forced fall from grace is that we don't spend a lot of time with Stanford before he becomes an asshole. At most, we know he's a guy who can't wait to see his wife again, but the scene right after is him being unfaithful. Keep in mind this is presumably less than 12 hours after the injection, and it's unclear whether that's something he would have done had he not been injected with the serum. That's why it's so hard to connect with the guy. We know him as Jerk Larry for longer than we know him as Nice Larry. And even when he's Nice Larry, he still flirts with another woman. I think that's why Larry Talbot is a great example of this kind of tortured character being done well. Becoming the Wolfman didn't turn him into a raging asshole during the daytime, which allowed us to sympathize with him better as he rightfully expressed his frustrations with the curse. Hell, Stanford's name is also Larry. You'd think the filmmakers would have taken a couple lessons. When his wife confronts him, it's more like catharsis.
Hello, Larry.
The movie may have been going for a theme here, but it's not illustrated very well.
What else do you want? The illusion of respectability? All right, if that's what you want, I'll marry you.
It doesn't help that the film's script is pretty goofy. It makes it hard to take the drama seriously.
What the devil's gotten into him lately?
I don't know. Maybe it's what you just said. The devil's gotten into him.
That and the theremin whenever Larry experiences pain from the transformation. And yeah, the empathy isn't really there. So you're just watching this mean guy become a monster and like, yeah, it's watchable. In fact, the makeup and special effect scenes are quite decent. The first scene where the monster emerges from Stanford's shoulder is quite effective. It's well lit and hides the imperfections. The weird lady the doctor keeps in his basement looks convincing enough too. You gotta keep the era these films were produced in mind when judging their effects quality. And of the films made around this time, I think the effects here are average, above average. Though, seeing this two-headed guy run around in wide shots adds a layer of unintended comedy to the whole thing. And there's a lot of it in the final act. The highlight of the film has to be the final scene where Larry separates from his evil half. It becomes a monkey man. It's fun. It also conveniently disposes of Larry's mistress, so the film doesn't have to actually confront his infidelity. Really swept that one under the rug, guys. It's not awful, I was entertained, but there's simply no emotional core to the thing. Not a bad way to start the video, though. Our final Frankenstein movie of the box set, it's a western/horror movie, and it's a bad one at that. Who would have thought a movie with the title Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter would be bad? The first sign is right there in the title. Frankenstein's daughter? You mean Frankenstein? Why the specificity? It's not even accurate. This movie is about Frankenstein's granddaughter. They couldn't even get that right.
He's been shot.
Well, he was cleaning his gun.
Anyways, said granddaughter, Maria Frankenstein, is a cartoonishly evil woman whose experiments in reviving the dead have significantly whittled away the population of a Mexican village. How evil is she? Well, up until now, she's been using the brains of children instead of grown adults.
It's because we've been forced to use the brains of children that we've failed. What we need is a man.
So she needs the body of a big brute, which she finds with the big dumb sidekick of Jesse James. Well, not right away. There's a bit more setup where Jesse gets involved in a stagecoach heist. It's pretty much a subpar western for a while, until it turns into a subpar horror movie.
Jesse, look out!
Even Native Americans show up. Everyone's favorite and definitely not poorly aged western movie trope. Anyways, Jesse brings his big dumb friend to Frankenstein's home in the hopes she will cure him of the getting shot in the stomach a whole day ago disease. Like seriously, this guy takes a comically long time to bleed out. He eventually gets converted into the film's Frankenstein monster, and he's certainly a design. It's literally just a guy with stitching on his head. They did not try with the monster here. They try to tie it further to the Frankenstein mythos by naming him Igor, but like, that's not even accurate to the original story.
Get him, Igor! Get him!
There's also this subplot about this lady being infatuated with Jesse James, and the whole thing is badly written and hard to watch. She wants to fix him, but he's already too long gone. Even Frankenstein tries to cozy up to Jesse. How is this guy such a chick magnet? He has the charisma of sandpaper. It's poorly acted, shot flatly to such a degree that it never excites or scares visually, and it's silly in ways they never intended. It almost barely makes for a good bad movie night film. Like, seriously, this is the guy's eulogy. It's incredible.
Kill Juanita. Kill her. Kill Juanita. Kill Juanita. Kill Juanita.
If you've watched Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, you've probably heard of this one. The Phantom Creeps is a film edit of a serial starring Bela Lugosi as Dr. Zorka, hell-bent on world domination, and the edit itself is of dubious quality.
Remotely controlled. You could crush all up.
This is a Universal joint too, so it has a bit of the production value you would expect from one of their monster movies. To an extent. This production value can be seen in Dr. Zorka's arsenal of weapons, such as a mechanical spider that follows a magnetic disc and explodes when it makes contact and makes its target go into suspended animation for some reason, a belt that makes him invisible, a Z-ray where anyone who's hit by it gets, quote, impregnated with this invisible gas and dies, and finally a giant robot with a demon baby face. It's goofy, yet it's become iconic imagery in its own way. Some of the special effects are pretty hokey though. This is an edit of a 4-hour-long serial, so the pacing is about as messed up as you would expect. Conflicts are introduced and almost immediately resolved. Everything moves way too fast, but the serial's zaniness still shines through. All of those aforementioned weapons, for example. Most infamously, the serial resorts to some of the most insensitive use of stock footage ever. When a blimp gets taken down, they show footage of the Hindenburg disaster. The modern-day equivalent would be like if an Asylum movie used footage of 9/11. It's fucked up. That aside, there's a lot of insanity crammed into these 78 minutes. The cast is largely unremarkable, but Bela Lugosi is as fun as always. And the crazy things that happen are pretty unpredictable. It's not non-stop fun, but it's an overall enjoyable time. Had it on in the background, it was a passive watch. Don't Look in the Basement, aside from being what I say to my guests, is a 1973 low-budget independent horror movie about a new nurse in a private sanitarium having to deal with its unrestrained patients. What makes this one an alleged mad scientist movie is that there's a doctor at the very beginning who believes that having mental patients play into their lunacy is the path to curing them. We don't learn that until later when we get the explanation from this lady, because the mad scientist is killed less than 6 minutes into the film. He gave a mental patient an axe. That was all on him. The cast here is wild and varied. Standouts include a woman who thinks a doll is her baby, a man with the mind of a child, a sergeant who thinks there's still a war, the accidental axe murderer who considers himself judge, jury, and executioner, and the prerequisite scary old lady.
Do you get out often? It's you who need to get out.
Even the head nurse is a nutcase. The film takes a while to set all the characters up, and for a time, the plot meanders without much of a direction. It's a detriment to the film, but tonally, it kinda fits. It's like the screenplay was written by the people in the house. With the directing and tight close-ups and surprisingly solid performances, it can be effectively uncomfortable. Eventually, something does happen. The meandering finally amounts to some action, and everyone is a suspect. There is a sadness to the characters in this movie, and each has an internal logic that's understandable and sympathetic. I do think the film didn't need to go as far with them as it did in the final scene. It essentially turns all but one into savage monsters, but it does at least end the film on a high note. It's undoubtedly not the most refined production, the audio is all recorded on set, and the pacing is serving a story that feels aimless as it sets up all these disparate elements that finally add up to something in the last act. But the filmmaking is somewhat sophisticated. Plenty of inventive shots, wild performances, and it has an uncomfortable atmosphere throughout. It's a sweaty and weird little flick. I liked it. The kind of grimy grindhouse cinema this collection desperately needed more of. I can't wait for more movies like this to fall into the public domain.
Good night, Sergeant.
Embryo is a 1976 film starring a late-career Rock Hudson, and it's got a very intriguing premise. Dr. Paul Holliston is experimenting with the rapid growth of fetuses in the hopes of using his scientific breakthrough to save miscarriages. When he experiments on a human fetus, it grows rapidly against his intent until he finds a sort of antidote to slow the process down, stopping as the embryo reaches adulthood. This is the kind of intrigue I'm looking for in science fiction. Out there concepts that make the viewer wonder, what if? What are the moral and ethical implications of growing a human being in a lab? The scientist's droll narration even notes a couple things. This embryo lady, Victoria, wasn't held down by the same environmental restrictions the rest of us have. She was an embryo over 4 weeks ago. Though the claim that she's using 100% of her brain is a little ridiculous. And see, this is where the cracks in the film start to show. They brush over too much. Victoria is able to read sometime later in her development, but after that, she doesn't recognize that flowers aren't edible? And the leaps in logic taken with her character only get worse from there. They also have a habit of telling and not showing. There's this whole sequence where Victoria went out in public for the first time, but it's recounted through ADR.
It was all exciting and beautiful, but sometimes I felt I said the wrong things or asked the wrong question.
She's also highly intelligent for someone born 4 weeks ago, meaning she's more knowledgeable about facts than human emotion. It does result in an entertaining scene where she beats a Roddy McDowell cameo in chess.
I've never played. I've only read books. I've never played. I've only read books.
You let me win! Oh! She let me win! Nobody lets me win! Get me out of here!
But rather than further explore the concepts it puts forth, it leaves the viewer to mentally ask these questions, while the movie itself instead pursues something more by the numbers. It turns out the rapid growth hormone also makes the subject more aggressive, and we first see that in this hilarious scene where the Doberman embryo turns another dog into a plushie. This can be seen to some degree in Victoria, who begins to dispose of people on the verge of discovering her origin, in addition to taking pituitary gland liquid from unborn babies to stop her rapid aging, which is resumed, of course. It's contrived, and I hate to admit it lost me because the premise was so interesting. Things really take a turn for the weird when Victoria wants to have sex with the doctor, an offer he accepts, which, I don't know, man, that's kinda fucked up. He raised her like she was a child. The film initially treats this like it's a romantic thing, too. The doctor has the prerequisite dead wife, so maybe he's trying to fill the void, but that and the fact that she still has childish tendencies just makes it more fucked up. The film set up a couple other guys as romantic interests, and I mean, that would be bad too, but at least it wouldn't have been her guardian. Point is, she's pregnant now. The opportunities to explore potentially interesting concepts feel squandered in favor of a story that moves along at a rather slow pace and isn't very interesting. I was kinda engaged throughout, but it's not a particularly well-sustained film. It has an interesting premise, but it only takes the film so far because the execution is lacking. It has decent acting, cool ideas, but it's rather meandering. It's due for a remake.
I'll call you from Minneapolis.
At first glance, Son of Ingagi is pretty unique for its time. It was written by and starred an all-black cast, which was unheard of in 1940. But having an all-black cast is one thing. Depending on how it was produced and directed, it could still be very dated. I'm 125 movies into these box sets. I've gotta be careful. Well, having just seen it, I can tell you it's, luckily, mostly dated in the writing, pacing, and acting sense.
I think that would be lovely.
Hey, is it normal to start dancing to no music?
The party is on. Well, what are we waiting for?
Okay, so anyways, the film is about an evil witch, who's actually a mad scientist, because of course she is, who brings back a big hairy creature from Africa. It eventually kills the witch and terrorizes anyone who steps into his house for the rest of the movie. It's really no more simple than that. The movie is barely over an hour long and kinda follows uninteresting characters, and the monster appears on occasion. For a movie with an all-black cast, there sure is a lot of white noise. The lack of music is almost deafening. The general filmmaking is pretty uninteresting too. It's a lot more like a stage play, with many scenes being long takes of the camera, positioned far back from the actors as they recite their lines. There is this one bit which is kinda awkward, but struck me as, it's something. They were doing something here. It's the total lack of music that really hurts this one. It makes things way more awkward than it should be. Well, anyways, this is a pretty tepid little monster movie. It's got historical significance for being one of the first all-black monster movies, but that's kinda it. The movie itself is bad. Next film, please. The New Zealand Film Commission seemed pretty chill in the 80s. They let Peter Jackson make some absurdly violent horror films, and here comes a film from 1984 that came before all of his and is pretty violent in its own right. Death Warmed Up. I guess it would be pronounced Death Warmed Up over there.
He looked like death warmed up.
The mad scientist of this one, Dr. Archer Howell, is proper mad. He believes that the dead can be revived, and part of his plan includes injecting this poor guy directly into his ass, briefly turning him into a zombie slave who goes after the doctor's scientific enemies. Oh, hey, nice boom mic. Not exactly sure what that accomplished, but 7 years pass and the guy he injected, Michael, has finally been released from an insane asylum, while the doctor is now practicing zombie brain surgery and running for office. Michael wants revenge for the unjust incarceration. Allegedly. He kinda dicks around with his friends for the first half and stumbles into the mad scientist's plans. Parts of this movie screams, "Watches Mad Max once." The zombie characters are dressed up like post-apocalypse punks, and they chase our main characters in a couple motorized vehicles. It's derivative, but it adds a dumb fun energy to the film. The camera work of this one is wild and loose. I can appreciate how it seems to be handheld but still smooth. The energy it gives the film's action scenes is undeniable. Is that the Taco Bell sound effect? The story of this one is needlessly meandering, and the music sounds like it came directly from a bad Sega Genesis game. but the script is delightfully corny.
Where are you taking us? I'm taking you down to hell, boy.
The gore is exquisitely brutal too, and the camera work is a lot of fun. It's almost total nonsense for 71 minutes, but it's enjoyable nonsense when you can see it. I hate to keep beating this drum, but the visual quality is quite poor in this collection. This movie was apparently banned in Australia for its violence, and let's be real, what hasn't been banned in Australia?
Another mystical experience.
So here's the fun part about Invasion of the Bee-Girls. I can't talk about it on YouTube. The subject matter is a little too risque, and I couldn't really find a way to talk about it without addressing the risque elements. And I want this video to stay monetized, and I think this movie would push it over the edge of monetization. But if you want to see the review, I will make the uncensored version of this video free on my Patreon. You can check it out there if you really want to. Anyways, let's move on to the next movie. Our penultimate film of this series is Metamorphosis, which is also the latest film of this collection, being released in 1990, not to be confused with Metamorphosis, the Alien Factor, which was also released in 1990, which isn't to be confused with The Alien Factor, directed by Don Dohler and released in 1978, which got a sequel in 2001 titled Alien Factor 2: The Alien Rampage. Metamorphosis is not to be confused with any of those. A guy who looks like Christopher Reeve and acts like Patrick Bateman is a struggling geneticist and faces the loss of his funding after too many failed experiments. So, and I hope you saw this coming from a mile away because I sure did, out of desperation he experiments on himself. The injection makes him better at sports, more sexually aggressive, and slowly turns him into a dinosaur. If you've seen the 1986 Fly remake with Jeff Goldblum, it's like that, but worse. There's even a scene where he checks the computer for anomalies in the experiment. So his hypothesis is that if someone were to become an ageless being, the environment will reward them, but it will also be drained of its resources. So he wants to create something that's ageless, but doesn't do that. It's a bit lost in its writing. There is a mildly interesting element where the protagonist blacks out and has to retrace his steps to figure out what he did the night before and why people are reacting so negatively to him. But I think what doesn't work about this is that the guy just isn't that likable to begin with. From the beginning, he's a bit of a pompous asshole. If anything, him turning into a cold-blooded lizard guy is just the next step. It doesn't have an emotional core to it like The Fly. The movie also sees him starting a relationship with this lady, and that's an attempt to give the movie something to cling to, but the movie doesn't show them spending enough time together. I just don't care about what happens to these characters. The highlight of the movie is the ending. I don't really care about spoiling it, but he turns into a fucking dinosaur. Like, he was turning into one beforehand, but I didn't expect him to go full T-Rex. And after that, he gets reduced to a tiny lizard. It's fucking bizarre. Still a better design than the lizard from The Amazing Spider-Man. Not a very good movie, but not terrible either. Horror Express is a 1972 Spanish horror movie that I've been excited to talk about ever since I've had the idea for these box set videos. Its presence here is dubious though. There are scientists in the film, but I wouldn't call them mad. It's in the public domain, but it's one of those movies that probably fell into it by complete accident, rather than the rights holders just being disinterested. Because this is a genuinely good, if not campy movie.
How do you explain it not writing on that crate?
Hypnosis, yoga.
A grumpy anthropologist, Dr. Saxton, played by former Dracula and future sorcerer Christopher Lee, discovers the frozen body of a Neanderthal-like creature, and he embarks via train to have it further analyzed in England. It turns out the creature is alive, but there's more to it than that. It's actually the host body of an alien from prehistoric times. and it's capable of frying and taking information from the brains of whoever it makes eye contact with, in addition to being able to swap bodies. In essence, it's a take on The Thing, but set on a train.
The Unholy One is among us.
There are many zany characters on this Express to Hell. There's a scientist, a rival Dr. de Saxton played by Peter Cushing, a duchess, and a mad monk. Dr. Saxton is a bit of an asshole, but he's just one of many characters to follow here.
I have heard of evolution. It's immoral.
It's a fact. And there's no morality in a fact.
I enjoy the interactions in this cast.
There's a scientific explanation. You know it? No.
Peter Cushing as Lee's friend and rival is, needless to say, quite good in this too. Generally speaking, they both work well together, no matter the movie. He's got some memorable lines too.
What if one of you is the monster?
Monster? They're British, you know.
Telly Savalas plays a Slavic inspector who is introduced late into the film, and he really leaves an impression.
Beware the wrath of Satan.
In execution, maybe the film is a little goofy. The creature's blood is used to view memories, and for some reason he retains his hairy arm when he swaps bodies. I think the looser rules are more applicable when it's an alien from outer space. I enjoy this collision of horror with out-there sci-fi concepts. It's fun, and it goes off the rails in the best way. Train joke entirely intended. An actual contrivance is the monk character, who is raving against the evil of Satan at the start of the film, and is now suddenly wanting to help him. It just doesn't make any sense. The music of this film is great, the main theme at least. It's played throughout, and it's diegetic for whatever reason, but it's a nice melody. There's a bit of sadness that it adds to the film's monster. All it wants to do is return to space. If we're considering this as an actual adaptation of the original Who Goes There novella, then this Thing is really the first one with actual characterization. He's essentially a more dimensional character, having expressed wants to go back to outer space. There's no mystery about who he's pretending to be either. We follow this Thing throughout the movie, so he's almost sympathetic.
Can gravity be overcome?
But yeah, Horror Express is great stuff. Definitely not flawless in execution, it's a little schlocky, but the music is catchy, the performances are great, it can be genuinely spooky, the blend of horror and sci-fi really works, and its pacing is almost like that of a modern film. It just moves along from set piece to set piece at blistering speed, and it just feels right. It's easily one of, if not the best film in this box set. I'm quite fond of it. I have now covered every movie in the box set. I'm really tired. If you ignore the 20 leftover films from the science fiction and horror collection, most of them being crap, and if you don't mind every movie here looking like it was thrown in a microwave for a minute, this is a pretty unique collection of oddities that's worth buying. I mean, you could also just watch them on YouTube since they're all either public domain or cheap to license, and whatever version's been uploaded online is likely in better quality. But if you want Bela Lugosi's ape makeup to grace your collection, this fits that niche, you weirdo. I'll be taking another extended break from these box set videos, and I can't make any promises, but maybe look forward to another one of these this October. Thanks for watching till the end. Of course, many thanks to my patrons who helped make videos like this possible. Here are the top ones. JCS, Mulan Nguyen, Ultraman Taro vs. Leo, Heian Mooney, Krazak53, Koman, Queer Kaiju, Radiant GV, Chronicler Wava, Alcoholic Alligators, Ryan Santa Cruz, Avok Robot, The Antagonist, Richard C. Avardon, Ziggy Zigra, It's God Z, Big Odilo, An Actual Dimetrodon, CMG, Red Comet Harry, and Marpzilla. Thank you very much.